the problem we're already seeing firsthand the devastation climate change causes, from heat waves and droughts to wildfires and hurricanes. And unlike many other global challenges, the solution to climate change is clear. It lies in consigning dirty fossil fuels like coal to history, in ditching gas-guzzling modes of transport, and recognising the role that nature plays in preserving life on this planet, and harnessing the power of nature through renewable energy rather than orchestrating its destruction. If we don't act now, the Paris Agreement will be looked at in the future not as the moment humanity opened its eyes to the problem, but the moment we flinched and turned away. We've seen some progress in the last few days and weeks. Saudi Arabia, Australia and Russia have all made net zero commitments, meaning 80% of the global economy will wipe out its contribution to climate change by the middle of the century, up from 30%, thanks to the UK's COP26 leadership. Countries such as the United States have doubled their spending on climate aid. Every nation at this weekend's summit will end the financial support for international unabated coal projects by the end of this year. But these commitments, welcome as they are drops in a rapidly warming ocean when we consider the challenge we've all admitted is ahead of us. Just 12 G20 members have committed to reach net zero by 2050 or earlier. Barely half of us have submitted improved plans for how we will cut carbon emissions since the Paris summit in 2015. And we've also failed to meet our commitments to provide $100 billion a year to support developing countries to grow in a clean and sustainable way. The UN says emissions will rise by 15% by 2030, and they need to halve by then. The countries most responsible for historic and present-day emissions are not yet doing their fair share of the work. If we are going to prevent COP26 from being a failure, then that must change. And I must be clear that if Glasgow fails, then the whole thing fails. The Paris Agreement will have crumpled at the first reckoning. The world's only mechanism, viable mechanism for dealing with climate change will be holed beneath the waterline. Right now, the Paris Agreement and the hope that came with it is just a piece of paper. We need to fill that piece of paper, to populate it with real progress. And I know that humanity has in it the power to rise to the challenge. The UK has proved it can be done. We've lowered our greenhouse gas emissions by 44% in the last 30 years, whilst increasing our GDP by 78%. And we're cutting our contribution to climate change more and more every day. We've made some progress at this G20. We've had a reasonable G20. But there is a huge way still to go. We all know that we have the technology. What we need to do now is to raise the finance, but above all, we need the political will in Glasgow to make those commitments and to keep alive the hope of restraining the growth in our temperatures to 1.5 degrees. Thank you very much, and see you in Glasgow. I'll go now to questions from the media. I'm going to start with Robert Peston of ITV. Robert.
Prime Minister, you sound extremely gloomy about the prospects for enough progress being made in the next couple of weeks to limit global warming. You say there's been progress by G20 countries, but not enough. Realistically, what more can be done? And separately, there's been a bit of confusion today about whether there has been progress in de-escalating the conflict with France. How do you see it?
Oh, thanks very much, Robert. And let me just say, first of all, on where we are with the G20 on climate change. As I said, I think it's been reasonable. I think countries at the G20 have made a big effort. And we've got commitments by all G20 countries to net zero by the middle of the century. And if you remember when the UK started off on this, we had only 2 countries that were committed. That went up to 17 under the UK's COP26 leadership. And we're now at all G20 signed up. We've got everybody committed to trying to keep 1.5 alive, and we've got everybody agreeing that from the end of this year, no new financing of international coal. But, Robert, what everybody needs to do now is recognise that there are granular commitments that countries need to make on those 4 bucket areas of coal, cars, cash and trees that will help us to go further and make the reductions that we want to see. Otherwise, I'm afraid that the increase in temperatures will be considerably in excess of 1.5 degrees. And that's the challenge. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to pretend it's otherwise than it is. I think there's a chance. I really do. I think there's a chance that we can make the progress. Everybody can see how to do it. It's a question of will and leadership. And on where we are with our French friends, I want to stress that we've had good working with Emmanuel Macron and his team on COP. Really fantastic work on green technology. The French do an extraordinary job, as everybody knows, particularly with their power generation systems. Their commitments are excellent on nature, on their nationally determined contributions. I support what Emmanuel is doing on his One Planet initiative. On fish, I've got to tell you the position is unchanged. And I'll just say this for the record. I must say I was puzzled to read a letter from the French Prime Minister explicitly asking for Britain to be punished for leaving the EU. And I just have to say to everybody, I don't believe that is compatible either with the spirit or the letter of the withdrawal agreement or the trade and cooperation agreement. That's probably all I'll say about that one.
Just a very small thing on the communique conclusions.
Yes.
It says net zero on or around 2050. Many think that is a bit too vague.
Yeah. Well, I agree, and that is a function really of the gap between some colleagues and others. Some countries, as you know, have made commitments to 2060 rather than to 2050. What they've said is 2060 or earlier, and what we want to do is bring those commitments earlier. Can we go? Thanks, Robert, very much. Laura Koonsberg of the BBC.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. What chance do you think you really have of making progress with 200 countries in Glasgow when you haven't made enough progress with 20 countries here, and you don't seem able to sort out the question of a few dozen fishing permits with one of your closest allies, with the French? And what did you say to President Macron? I mean, the government's been explicit, it's very unhappy about the threats that France has made. What did you say to him?
I think that the chances of progress in Glasgow are exactly as I've said, Laura. I think they depend on the will, the courage, the leadership of everybody in the room. And, it's not just governments that want to do this, or governments like ours that are putting pressure on those leaders. It's their voters, their citizens. And they want us to fix this. And there will be people in Glasgow when the delegations arrive tonight and tomorrow from the G20 who will be anxious, who will be absolutely desperate for our COP26 to make the progress that they want. So I think the pressure on the world is enormous. I hope that they will agree. But, as I stand before you again tonight, as I said to you when we came out here to Rome, Laura, I think we have made reasonable progress at the G20, all things considered, but it is not enough.
And what did you say to President Macron?
We had a wide-ranging and frank discussion, as you'd expect, between long-standing friends and very, very close allies. Thanks. Let's go to Peter Walker of The Guardian. Will come. Ooh.
Thank you very much. You've talked about leadership and countries needing to show that. And you've talked a really, really good game. But in the budget just gone, fuel duty wasn't raised. You know, there's other things that you could have done too. Is it possible that countries will see policies like that and policies like cutting foreign aid, a lot of which went to developing nations, helping them fight climate change, and think, well, if he's not going to do it, then I don't see why we should?
Well, Peter, first of all, on foreign aid, as you heard from Rishi in the budget, where the growth in the economy means that we're going to be able to get back up to our commitments on foreign aid, which are, by the way, the highest, I think, of any partner in that room, except possibly for Germany already. So you know, I don't think people really doubt the UK's commitments on foreign aid. On fossil fuels in motor vehicles and taxes on that. What the UK is doing, actually, is going way out ahead of the pack in getting rid of hydrocarbon internal combustion engine vehicles by 2030, and we set the pace for that. We were ahead of the rest of the EU, and that's the really important thing. And I think also, when it comes to the credibility of the UK, people can see what we've done. We cut CO2 emissions by almost half on 1990 levels already. That's, you know, cutting CO2 by almost half for a major industrialised country, and our economy grew by 78%, 44% cut so far, and we're committed under this NDC to do 68% cuts by 1990 levels. That is a very, very punchy target indeed. And people know that we can do it, and they know that we are determined to do it, and they can see the progress that we've made. So I think that, you know, without being preachy or you know, or sounding virtuous, we can point to a pretty impressive record by the UK, and indeed I heard a bit of that in the room this afternoon. Thank you. Eleni Courier for The Times.
Prime Minister, the final
Yes.
communique of the G20 doesn't make any mention of phasing out domestic coal consumption. Do you think that's killed the chances of keeping 1.5 alive?
I think that's that is the important question. And did everybody catch it? It's about domestic coal use. And that's why going into Glasgow, we need to make more progress on coal and on domestic coal. And I think it can be done. And, you know, you've heard the commitments that some countries have made. The Indonesians have brought forward their targets. But you've seen what's happening in South Africa, where there's a big project now underway. And I think it's that model that we really need to develop if we're going to have a chance of cracking this. What needs to happen is that the countries that really depend on coal, particularly the less developed countries, the countries on the path of development, they are going to need help. And they're going to need specific packages, specific country platforms in which we in the richer countries help them, not just with investment, but with the investment that triggers the private sector to come in and help them with the new green technologies as well. That is the answer. It's not just a question of using taxpayers' cash from the developed world to fund this. It's a question of using our aid budgets, using all our efforts together as with the multilateral development banks and others to create the conditions, as we did with wind power in the UK, with the strike price and the contract for difference, to get the private sector to come in. And that's what we've got to work up. Now, the time is desperately short, but that's what needs to happen over the next few days.
Without more commitments, do you think that kills 1.5?
I think 1.5 is in the balance, very much in the balance. Currently, let's be in no doubt, currently we are not going to hit it, and we have to be honest with ourselves. So we've got to keep that hope alive. Max Colchester from the Wall Street Journal.
Prime Minister, why do you think that your fellow leaders didn't respond to your rallying cry to make serious changes regarding climate change? And what makes you so confident or potentially hopeful that the mood music will change at Glasgow?
Max, I think that what most people would say, looking at what's happened today and yesterday at the G20, is we have made some progress. We've inched forward. There's good things in the communique, but if I had to answer your question directly, what's the thing that is going to unlock this? The big solvent in so many negotiations is money, and I think that what will make the difference is when the countries on the path of development really feel that they are going to be helped towards that green technology in the way that I described. And so, people are holding out for that. They want to see how it can be done, how they can be helped. And, I passionately believe that it's the right thing to do. As you know, I think that the green industrial revolution in the UK will help us to deliver hundreds of thousands of great new high-wage, high-skill jobs. And you can see the evidence of that already. But, that's the work we have to do to persuade partners around the table.
And was there talk during the summit about increasing the amount of money given to developing nations to around $150 billion a year to try and help that transition?
Yeah, I mean, Narendra Modi, Prime Minister Modi, said, everybody should go up to 1% of GDP on sustainable finance for the world, on green finance for the world. And, as I've just said, the UK is already or will be, when we get back to 0.7 in 2024, we will be and have been for a long time one of the biggest as a percentage of GDP. But to get, the United States of America is way down. For the United States of America to get up to 1% of GDP, you're talking about a serious amount of money. Now, that is unlikely to happen, let me put it this way, in the short term. But what you can do is use the cash that we are putting in to trigger the private sector investment. That's what needs to happen. So, yes, there's a big discussion about money, but we'll have to see where we get. Annalisa Rapana of ANSA.
Yes, Prime Minister. So, would you say that after this G20 meeting, COP26 has more chances of success, or perhaps even less? And if you had to put a percentage to that chance of success right now, as we stand, what would that be?
Annalise, I'm going to stick with what I was saying to you all before. You know where I think it's sort of 6 out of 10. It's nip and tuck. It's touch and go. We could do it, or we could fail by the middle of November. I think what the Italian presidency of the G7 has unquestionably done is a superb job. I mean, really a superb job of organising the summit, keeping everybody focused. I mean, I think Mario has done a really first-rate job of keeping everybody focused on the gritty issues that we face and trying to get people to commit and to make progress. I think that we've made reasonable progress. We have certainly not gone into reverse. I think, as I said, I think we've inched forward. We've put ourselves in a reasonable position for COP in Glasgow, but it is going to be very, very difficult in the next few days. But I certainly want to thank the Italian government and the Italian presidency for all their efforts. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
OK, so that is the Prime Minister speaking after the G20 in Rome, and he was also speaking ahead of COP26 in Glasgow. That's going to be over the next couple of weeks or so. Let's take a little look at what we has been hearing in the last few minutes. Boris Johnson said that the science is clear, that we have to act now and halve emissions by 2030. He said there can be no more excuses. He said there has been some progress ahead of COP26 in recent days and weeks. He mentioned Saudi Arabia, he mentioned Russia, and he also talked about more money from the US. But he said they are drops in a rapidly warming ocean. And he said basically what is needed here to get a deal done is the political will and to raise more finances too. Let's talk to our international affairs editor, Dominic Wycorn, who is in Rome for us. Dominic, we're used to hearing the Prime Minister be really bullish on these sorts of occasions, really optimistic. He wasn't quite there this time, was he?
No, this was a very sober, rather gloomy Prime Minister, wasn't it? I mean, he says it's been a reasonable G20. All things considered, he said, but that's not good enough, he said. And he says that the next couple of weeks are going to be very, very difficult. So that's his take on the G20. I think we should remind ourselves where we are in terms of climate change, really. The fact is that if temperature rises can't be kept to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels, we're looking at climate catastrophe. We're looking at more extreme weather, more of the kind of storms and floods and drought that have killed many, many people around the world over the last few months alone. And on the eve of this summit, we had a warning from Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary-General, saying that we're looking more at 2.7 degrees at the moment, even if all the things that have been promised up to now, which is a big if, are implemented and acted upon. And he said that means we are careening towards climate catastrophe. The way you come down from 2.7 to 1.5 is you phase out coal completely. If coal has continued to be dug out of the ground and burned, there's no chance of meeting 1.5. So the hope was today or yesterday, or at least over the next 2 weeks, the process of phasing out coal could begin. The best the G20 final communique can come up with that is that an aspiration to phase out coal power as soon as possible. You can also reduce emissions, obviously, and the best that the final communique can come up with that is promising meaningful and effective action to keep emissions down, to keep 1.5 degrees centigrade as an ambitious or a live target. And the other main ambition for this summit and the 2 weeks ahead is to set aside $100 billion that can be given by rich nations, the rich nations here, to much poorer nations to mitigate the cost of climate change and to make them realise and understand that it's worth them staying on board and following the lead given by the 20 nations here, the world's richest nations. Well, we're still nowhere near that $100 billion, according to this communique. The spin that's being put on it by Downing Street and government officials is that, A, it's not as bad as it had looked yesterday, which is a very low bar, given that yesterday it looked like these talks were going to fall apart completely. But also some consolation, they're saying, is this promise in the communique of further action being taken over the next decade. And what they're saying is that this process of revising emissions and targets every 5 years could be brought forward to every 3 years. Not just on carbon dioxide, but methane as well. So that's the kind of consolation they're putting on it. But, I mean, a pretty frank admission there from the Prime Minister saying that it's, in his mind, as reasonable as it can get. But he's saying it's a very, very difficult challenge in the 2 weeks ahead, because if 20 nations, 20 richest nations can't do more here, what is the hope of 100 or 200 or so nations doing better in Glasgow?
All right, Dominic Wycorn.